Think of it as a going-away present.
We aren't supposed to root for villains, but television keeps handing us characters who make resistance feel like a performance for someone else's benefit. They walk in, and the air pressure changes. The hero suddenly has a worthy problem. The writers suddenly have sharper tools. And we, the audience, get to taste transgression without paying for it in real life. That's the hidden bargain of great TV villainy. They give us a safe laboratory for appetites we'd never admit. Ambition without apology. Pettiness dialed to opera. Control camouflaged as charisma. Chaos framed as a pop quiz for the soul. We tell ourselves we're only here to boo, but then we find ourselves counting the minutes until they show up again. And here's the other truth. Villains almost never win, and that's exactly why they matter. Winning would close the loop. Good television needs the loop to spin. So these characters are designed as pressure, not endpoints. The spark in the powder room, the shadow in the hallway, the laugh that says the rules are more elastic than we hoped. They clarify what the story values by attacking it. They make the hero's choices legible by tempting them toward shortcuts. They turn each episode into a referendum on what we believe when nobody's grading. The ones we secretly love don't just steal scenes. They set the terms of the world. They are the storm that reveals whether the roof was ever sound. What follows isn't a roll call of monsters, but a study in magnetism. 8 villains who made their shows bigger, sharper, and more honest by daring us to enjoy them. 8. J.R. Ewing, Dallas. J.R. Ewing made scheming look like etiquette. The hat was a crown, the smile a contract, the handshake a magician's misdirection. By the time you noticed your pocket felt lighter, you were already thanking him for the pickpocketing. His uniqueness wasn't outright cruelty. It was craft. He'd invite the audience to spot the con and still surprise us with the reveal, turning every deal into a televised heist. That swagger taught later TV how to make villains the ratings engine. You can trace his DNA through Logan Roy's boardroom warfare, Nucky Thompson's transactional morality, even the event TV cliffhanger culture that followed the frenzy of who shot JR. But he never truly won because soap operas collect karmic interest. Each triumph triggered a ricochet, resentful family, scorched earth rivals, or fate cashing in on hubris. If he conquered for good, the show would flatline. His job was to escalate, then pay just enough to reload. What he added was pace and purpose. Without JR, Dallas is real estate paperwork. With JR, it's gladiatorial capitalism performed by a gentleman wolf. We loved him because he made bad behavior dazzling, and because rooting for audacity, even when we knew better, felt like getting away with something ourselves. 7. Alexis Carrington Colby, Dynasty. Alexis practiced power as performance art. She entered rooms like a trumpet flourish, weaponizing couture and punctuation. A pause, a glance, a jeweled tilt of the head that landed like a writ of war. Her villainy wasn't just vengeance, it was choreography. The joy was in watching someone so self-possessed that even defeat became an outfit change. Later TV learned from her that a great antagonist can be both camp and credible. Blair Waldorf's Queen Bee tactics, Moira Rose's stage-ready self. Reality TV villains who understand the camera's hunger. These lines all trace back to Alexis's immaculate theatricality. Still, she never got to burn the ballroom down. Dynasty ran on a carousel of payback and parties, and Alexis's victories always arrived with fuse wire attached, a social backlash, a shiv from a bigger shark, or a familial implosion that restored the dance floor. Permanence would kill the party. The show needed her to win spectacularly, then lose spectacularly, so she could win spectacularly again. What she added was elevation. Conflicts became duels, scenes became stages, enemies became sparring partners who discovered new gears just to survive the heat. We secretly loved her because she turned cruelty into couture, and because, in her rare flickers of vulnerability, the marble statue breathed. Frank Burns, MASH. Frank wasn't a supervillain. He was the memo that ruins your day. Petty, insecure, and rulebook drunk, he represented the tyranny of small power, the sort of authority you actually meet in real life. That made him uniquely corrosive. In a unit buoyed by competence and compassion, he weaponized procedure and tattling, trying to restore a tidy order that war and humanity had already outgrown. The show let pinholes of sadness leak through, loneliness here, humiliation there, just enough to complicate the contempt and stop him from becoming a cartoon. Later TV kept borrowing the officious foil template, paper pushers, middle managers, minor bureaucrats who exist to make heroes sharper because it works. Frank rarely won because MASH is a moral ecosystem. Decency, improvisation, and gallows humor always counterbalance smallness. When he did get a technical victory, it soured quickly. His peers withdrew, the unit suffered, and the story corrected course. What he added was a whetstone. Every old-school prank and midnight kindness gleamed brighter against his pettiness, and the audience learned to cheer for generosity as a rebellious act. We loved him, secretly, for making the hero's humanity undeniable, and for serving as a painfully familiar mirror we could boo without real-world fallout. 5. Q. Star Trek, The Next Generation. Q was Loki with a gavel, omnipotent, bored, and uncomfortably invested in our self-improvement. He didn't just menace the Enterprise, he curated thought experiments. One week the crew faced their own prejudices. The next, they confronted time's loose threads, and all the while, Q's barbed humor nudged Picard to articulate not just strategy, but values. Their chemistry felt like a duel staged at a Socratic salon. Q poked, Picard defined the species. Later TV ran with the trickster as teacher archetype. Reality warpers who test heroes' ethics in everything from Doctor Who's puzzles to the Good Place's cosmic pranks to the self-reflective chaos of Loki. Q rarely won because victory would end the game. He is curiosity personified. Conquest is a closed door. The narrative needed him as pressure, not endpoint. When Picard's better logic held, Q's smirk suggested approval, a tutor pleased that the student found the answer. What he added was scope. A Q episode promised not only adventure, but a pop quiz on what it means to be civilized, brave, or kind under impossible conditions. We loved him because he made philosophy feel like fireworks, and because losing to him was never the point. Being measured by him was. 4. Mr. Burns, The Simpsons. Montgomery Burns is capitalism's ghost pretending to be a man. He's antique vocabulary, predatory instincts, and a liver-spotted hand hovering over the "release the hounds" button. The genius is that he's funny and recognizable. The satire lands because we know versions of his power in the real world. He became a prototype for lovably abhorrent magnates everywhere, animated and prestige alike, whose greed is so exaggerated it becomes an X-ray. You can't help but see the bones of the system. Burns never really wins because Springfield requires an eternal reset. If he permanently remade the town in his image, the satire would die, the jokes would curdle, and the family would have nowhere to bounce. So a Smithers twinge, a Homer stumble, or cosmic slapstick yanks away the prize, resetting the sandbox for next week's romp. What he brought to the show was a pressure valve. We could laugh at terror without turning numb. He gave us quotable villainy that made genuine anxieties feel handleable, and when the oaf from Sector 7G accidentally toppled him, it felt, for a blessed minute, like the powerless beating the powerful. We secretly loved him because he turned our dread into punchlines we could reuse at work on Monday. 3. The Cigarette Smoking Man, The X-Files. This villain announced the plot by reducing it to a whisper. A lit cigarette in a dark doorway meant the world was larger than the frame, the truth farther than the horizon, and our heroes already late. He was menaced by subtraction. Few words, fewer tells, and a face that seemed designed to watch doors close. The show's choice to reveal shards of backstory, failed aspirations, ugly loyalties, the gravity of small decisions, didn't cleanse him. It made the nightmare plausible. Later series borrowed his chill, the bureaucrat who administers a labyrinth, but rarely matched how his presence alone widened the map. He never truly won because secrecy is a paradoxical throne. Crush your enemies too hard and the conspiracy surfaces and suffocates. Ease up and it evaporates. The balance, the stalemate, is the power. What he added was gravity. Monster of the Week episodes bent toward a deeper constellation. When he appeared, the air thinned, the stakes thickened, and even silence felt like exposition. We secretly loved him not out of sympathy, but out of appetite. The story tasted richer, more mythic, whenever his smoke curled into the frame. 2. Newman, Seinfeld. Newman is the opera singer of petty grievances. He applies arch villainy to trivial objects. A pastry becomes a grail, a parking spot, a battlefield, the mail, a weapon system. The comic pleasure lives in that gap, the performance versus the prize, and in Wayne Knight's encyclopedic commitment to treating hallway skirmishes like Bond finales. Later sitcoms kept this blueprint. The nemesis, whose only superpower is gumming up the hero's life with tiny acts of sabotage. The frenemy who converts social friction into plot. Newman almost never wins because Seinfeld worships the equilibrium of discomfort. If he triumphed outright, the delicate ecosystem of annoyance would collapse, and with it, the show's thesis about modern life as a series of minor torments. What he added was focus, an externalized enemy that crystallized Jerry's microethics and gave the ensemble a reliable spark plug for mischief. We loved him because he let us indulge the fantasy that our dumbest grudges are epic quests, and then laugh at ourselves when the inevitable banana peel takes us down. 1. Skeletor, He-Man, and the Masters of the Universe. Skeletor perfected theatrical failure. The laugh was a hook. The insults were poetry. The plans detonated on contact with reality. And somehow, that was the selling point. He isn't frightening so much as irresistible, a child-safe introduction to the villain as entertainer. His henchmen exist as setups for his punchlines, and losing is woven into his stagecraft. He fails with panache. Animated TV learned from him that a quippy antagonist can be the reason kids come back next week. You can spot echoes in a long parade of colorful baddies built as much for meme potential as menace. He never wins because the moral universe and the toy aisle demand it. The closing PSA needs a clean arc. Virtue tested, virtue triumphant. But that ritual loss is the spice the show can't do without. In a world with a flawless hero, Skeletor supplies chaos, rhythm, and the gleeful certainty that the next failure will be more spectacular than the last. We secretly loved him because he made the defeat itself the main event, and because you can't cackle along with a hero the way you can with a skeleton sorcerer calling his minions bumbling boobs. Conclusion: if heroes are how we want to act, lovable villains are how we're tempted to feel. Clever, unembarrassed, certain. JR dazzled us with audacity and made power look like sport. Alexis turned conflict into couture and proved that elegance can draw blood. Frank showed how smallness metastasizes when it borrows a badge. Q bent reality until our values snapped into focus. Mr. Burns let us laugh at the machinery of greed without looking away. The cigarette-smoking man taught us the terror of implication. Newman elevated neighborhood grudges to myth. Skeletor reminded us that failure, performed with flair, is strangely satisfying. None of them were built to conquer. They were built to test the story's foundations. And, in doing so, to reveal ours. That's why their losses feel right. A decisive victory would end the conversation. A glorious defeat resets the board and preserves the laboratory. We tune in not to watch evil triumph, but to watch temptation do its best work, and then watch the world hold. And yes, we root for them a little, because transgression is thrilling when it's bracketed by theme music and credits. The secret is out. These villains weren't a bug. They were the feature that made everything else make sense. So tell me who lives rent-free in your head. Who sharpened a hero you love? Who made you laugh at your worst impulses? Who turned a good show into appointment television? Drop your pick and your why in the comments. If enough of you rally behind a favorite, we'll build part 2 around your rogues gallery.